Welcome to the latest episode of Griffin Manor. Now, in the last episode, I went walkabout and explored the 25 square kilometers around the estate, and I have the blisters to show for it. Now, I finally found some warm weather biomes, and besides some embarrassing tan lines, I made extensive additions to the various resources I'm already producing, including several different types of trees, most of the vanilla flower types, courtesy of the Flower Seeds mod, and all of the farmable vanilla food types, as well as some of the foods added by mods. Now, all of these resources are currently being produced on the surface of the estate, where I use no pesticides or chemicals. I was able to take the resulting map of the area, and I plotted out the existing villages, and then I went one step further to plan all new villages, and between the two of them, I will create the region of Griffinshire. In terms of job security, I think I'm set for a long while. Some of the other highlights were an island that rises straight up out of the water like the Rock of Gibraltar, and from which I quickly and easily harvested a mess of iron. There was also the area that looked like a gigantic impact crater that is full of interesting possibilities. And of course, there are the volcanoes and the nearby volcanic plains full of black sand. All in all, it was a fun and productive trip. However, in this episode, I'll be sticking much closer to home. It's time to start working on the infrastructure of the manor, and since most of it will actually be underground, the first element of that infrastructure will be to create the access shaft that will allow me to reach each of the underground levels. So in this episode, the goals to achieve this are to dig a primary access shaft to bedrock. Now, it won't be anything fancy, just a tube of stone bricks with a ladder running down the center of it all the way back to the surface. And once I reach bedrock, I will replace the ladder with scaffolding. With that first shaft in place, I will then go in and set up individual access points at each of the planned levels. These will give me a safe place from which to build outward on each of those levels. This initial access shaft with scaffolding is strictly a temporary thing. The plan is to build a proper working elevator, courtesy of the Create mod, so at each level I will set up and prepare the elevator shaft that will surround the initial access system. Now, when it comes time to install the elevator, I will be able to remove the stone brick and the scaffolding, and the rest will be ready and waiting for my new elevator. And finally, as I set up the shell for the elevator shaft, I will be establishing the physical theme of the underground portions of the manor. If it don't look good, I don't look good, or something like that. But before I get going with all of that, I want to point out some changes that I'm making in my game. Now, as you may know, I use the Lithos 32X resource pack, and I absolutely love it. And while it covers all the vanilla blocks up to 1.19.0 and a few of my mods, it doesn't cover all of my mods. And to be fair, why should it? However, I am perfectly free to step in and start filling in the gaps myself, and that's what I'm already doing. So I've started with the Farmer's Delight mod, and I've updated the textures for cabbages, cabbage leaves, and the various bits directly related to cabbages. Eventually, I plan to replace all the existing 16x textures in my game with the 32x textures, either from Lithos or myself, or even another resource pack if it meshes well with Lithos. I'll keep you posted. In the original Griffin Hall video series, I talked briefly about how I had come to eventually build all or most of my Minecraft bases underground. But bases usually require a lot of functionality, and I'm particularly picky about being able to produce as many different resources as possible from within my base. And all of that generally requires a lot of space. I have long since learned that generally, it is easier, more productive, and more convenient to build down than to build outward. And so the central access shaft of the base is an absolutely critical part of the overall design, and that's why I spend a lot of time and attention on it. At the very top of the stack is the only part of the base that actually sits on the surface, and that will be the manor house itself. However, that's not a concern for the access shaft. That's because the access shaft will essentially be a large freight elevator, and who wants something like that running through the middle of an elegant mansion? Now, besides, the manor house is not really intended to be functional in any practical sense. It's more of a showpiece, and it's kind of like the lighthouse from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, most of my time will be spent in the underground levels or away from the manor entirely. Traditionally, in a large estate, the kitchen and staff quarters would be at the lowest level of the house. Now I've integrated that into my base plan, so this is where the elevator will start. Now just to be clear, I'm talking about the lowest level of the house, not the base. The kitchen will be the main food processing facility, and that includes extensive storage facilities for food items, both ingredients and finished dishes. Using the Storage Drawers mod, this system will be connected to the agricultural levels below, and I will automate those levels as much as possible, which should ensure that there's a large amount of food available at all times. And this will be particularly useful for Super Bowl parties and the holiday season. When I say that I'll move everything underground, that means literally everything, even the livestock. Now, one of the main advantages of this is that I'll not have hostile mobs spawn in the middle of my livestock pens. That means no pillagers, no zombies, no skeletons, and certainly no freaking creepers. It also means the odd escapee or two can't get very far. Now, the ranching will be semi-automated. I plan to let the animals freely roam in their spaces, and I'll manually harvest them when it comes to that. But I plan to automate their daily care and breeding courtesy of the Animal Feeding Trough mod. My experience with automated farms has proven to me that you don't need a lot of space to grow plenty of any given item if the farm's constantly working. So I should be able to grow everything I need and then some using only one level despite the sheer number of farmable crops I have. Having this level closer to the surface makes it easier to connect it and the livestock level to the food storage system for automatic sorting and storage. On the plan it shows that I have 4 levels devoted to trees. Now that doesn't mean that I'll have 4 levels of trees, but rather I will have 1 level of trees, but the vertical nature of trees being what it is, means that I'll need a lot of open vertical space in which the trees can grow, and so that's what's going on here. It really is just 1 level, but it will take up the space of 4 individual levels. I do intend to fully automate the harvesting of the trees, but there may be some complications here based on the performance problems we ran into with the Create mod back in the Griffin Hall series. Now 1 or 2 tree harvesting rigs, probably not a problem. Dozens of them, it's a potential problem. The tree farms are also at a lower depth than the other agricultural facilities, and that's because the output of these farms is going to go down to the main storage facilities instead of up to the food storage and preparation areas. However, they are still a ways from where the main storage controller will sit, and so I may not be able to connect them directly. I may have to run the tree harvesting on its own storage network and then use Minecraft hoppers or Create mod chutes to drop materials down to the main storage network. I'll untie that knot when the time comes. In vanilla Minecraft, I would normally generate and use a great deal of fuel, primarily for smelting operations. But with the Create mod, I can build systems that'll let me smelt without fuel. However, the same mod brings me blaze burners and steam engines, which do require fuel to some extent, and so there's still a need for fuel. Kelp blocks are a fantastic and renewable fuel source. However, making kelp blocks is normally a huge pain in the butt, and in my humble opinion, not generally worth the effort. However, with the Create mod, I have ideas as to how I can automatically grow, harvest, and process the kelp into blocks, giving me unlimited and essentially free fuel. The workshop is the heart and soul of the base, and this is where I will spend most of my time while at the manor. It's where almost all the other systems come together. Now, all materials except food will be routed and stored here, and my primary processing facilities will be located here as well. And in some cases, they will feed directly back into storage for added ease of use and convenience. Once I get the elevator up and running, this is where I'll focus my efforts before I continue work on the rest of the base. Historically, the heart of my long-distance transportation system is what I call the Metro. It is essentially an underground railroad arranged in a grid pattern with stops at 1 kilometer intervals, which is eventually integrated into a similar system in the Nether that is used for faster travel over even longer distances. In vanilla Minecraft, I used minecarts and the system was pretty primitive, but it was effective. In modded Minecraft, I'll use the railway features of the Create mod to create an actual and proper rail system. Now this upper level will be the metro station where I plan to build the metro concourse and set it up to look and feel like an actual train or metro station. There will be stairs leading to the lower level where I'll have the actual platforms from which to board and disembark trains, and of course there are the tracks themselves. Mind the gap. The existence of the metro does not preclude the existence of other rail systems, especially on the surface. In fact, I'm looking forward to having a and I'm using air quotes here, realistic railway system between villages and regions. But the metro is really for minimizing travel time for longer distances. In the Griffin Hall series, the plan had always been to eventually install an elevator courtesy of the Moving Elevators mod. Now I say eventually, and again with the air quotes, because to build a proper elevator with in-car controls, call buttons on each level, and panels showing the available floors and where the elevator car is currently located was going to cost me a small fortune in iron, and I never seem to have quite enough iron to implement it in the overworld, much less the nether. With the 0.5.1 release of the Create mod, they've added what I consider to be complete functional support for elevators, and the cost in iron is radically lower. So I fully intend to build the elevators in the overworld and the nether much sooner than I would have been able to in Griffin Hall. The first step in today's effort is to build the core access shaft down to bedrock. Now, since I'm working from the top downward, I start with ladders. However, once I reach the bottom, I replace the ladders with scaffolding from the bottom up. At one point I passed through a large and open cavern system, and it looks like there are a series of lush caves branching out from there. However, building through that presented some challenges to keep the bad guys off my back so I could safely work. Now, as you might expect, I used a lot of sand and gravel to build temporary walls to shield me from the hostile hordes. This core shaft is temporary and meant to facilitate access only until I get the elevator up and running. Once the core shaft is in place, it will be time to build the larger elevator shaft and the surrounding shell. But for now, I'm adding a layer of stone brick blocks at each floor to prevent long and probably lethal falls. However, before I wrap things up on this episode, I will install safety nets at the bottom, courtesy of the Supplementaries mod, and then remove these block layers. They will need to be removed eventually anyway, and the safety net gives me a quick and relatively safe alternative to reaching the bottom levels. Now this is where I need to design and decide upon a thematic template to use in the underground spaces of the manor. Now, after years and years of using stone bricks and stone for my main building materials, I am still enjoying the relative novelty of deep slate blocks, so I would like to integrate a variety of deep slate block types and styles to arrive at something that is thematically similar but has enough variety to not make everything look too similar. I think a combination of deep slate blocks and tiles is the ticket here. And that essentially wraps it up for this episode. As I look down the shaft like this, I am reminded of the old guy in brown robes that asked me where the main tractor beam control panel could be accessed, but that's a story for another time. The next step in this project is to essentially do this all over again, but in the nether. And of course, the nether will introduce a number of complications and challenges, but once complete, it would give me a secure foothold from which I can explore, harvest, and build in the nether. And all of that would open up some interesting aspects of the game for me, including potion brewing and the ability to create blaze burners, which are a key part of intermediate and advanced contraptions and processing in the Create mod, including the elevators I've been talking about here. So I guess one could say that I'll have a hell of a time out there. And with all of that said, I hope this finds you and yours in good health, good spirits, and a touch of good fortune. Take care of yourselves out there. Cheers.